there was an AIDS patient that died of hepatitis or whatever the case may be. Now, how did this come about? All right. From my studies, and I speak from research myself, so anything that I say when I state fact, you can look it up yourself and judge for yourself. Like I said, I'm not trying to get you to agree with me, but just think, open your mind. Okay. Now, AIDS was first discovered by my research, according to my researchers, in the early 1980s, when a group of homosexuals walked into a clinic or hospital, however you want to call it, with illnesses. They did research and testing and everything on these patients. And after they did the research and testing, at first it didn't come back, conclusive of anything. So they saw a virus that they had not yet seen, that hadn't been discovered yet. So then these people were told that they had an advanced immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS. Now, AIDS has become a pandemic disease. And a pandemic disease is something that can cause possible catastrophic worldwide number of deaths. Okay? It's just an insurmountable number of deaths around the world. That's what a pandemic is. So when these patients were told that they had AIDS, news got out and the media did its job by blowing things out of proportion, blowing things up. And soon after, the entire United States was on an AIDS watch. And then it became an AIDS awareness. The entire United States became aware of AIDS. So at that time, they had not yet known where this new disease came from. So the only reports of the original carriers of AIDS were a group of homosexuals. This was in the early 80s. So what would that tell you? Okay, and you say, well, what does that have to do with population control? Think about it. America started off with the American dream. Homosexuality was not exactly part of the American dream. Now, America has been finding ways or trying to find ways for years to fight homosexuality, to discourage young men and women, older men and women, whomever it may be, to not be homosexuals until recent times. Okay. Now, when this news got out about this deadly disease with no cure because it has no research behind it yet, had come from AIDS patients or homosexual patients, then what would that do for population control? That would discourage people from being homosexuals. If a person who once was homosexual or is a homosexual or is planning to or thinking about it, maybe teetering the lines back and forth to maybe experiment with homosexuality, if they hear something like this, that will discourage them more than likely from being, and like I said, this was the first onslaught of the disease being reported by homosexuals, having the disease, that would discourage them from being a homosexual. So then that is another form of straightening out the population. And I hate to use the pun, but scare the population straight. So then that technique didn't necessarily follow through according to plan. And people still, maybe at a lesser degree, was still experimenting with homosexuality. So eventually the testings came back and they did the research on AIDS, and it was found to be a disease that had originated in Africa. Now, I want you to take note that for some apparent reason, which may be obvious after I say this, take note there has never been a disease, especially a pandemic disease, that originated in the good old United Snakes of America. Now, back to the AIDS. AIDS, advanced immune deficiency syndrome, a pandemic, which could cause catastrophic death throughout the entire world, is found to be originated in Africa and has been transported to America. So what does that mean? It's an African American disease. So how does that, work against population control? Now, when I say African American, I'm saying this in two senses of enlightenment. Because obviously, Black Americans are considered African Americans. Because if somebody sees you, they relate Black Americans with Africa. Even though over 90% of Black Americans have never even seen Africa other than on a globe and on TV. And there's a specific caricature about the image of Africa being poor, with the children having flies crawling on their faces and in their nose and walking around barefooted, feed the hungry and things like that. So this is the image we get of Africa. Now, go back to AIDS, advanced immune deficiency syndrome.